Hi, I'm Gina and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm an artist and a creator of miniatures and doll houses. I've got a current project on the go, which is the Addams family mansion, and in today's video I'm going to show you through how I have made this vanity. It's all made out of mat board, cardboard and paper. Full disclosure though, the basin is actually ceramic, so I've actually purchased that separately, but this unit here which houses the basin is what I'm actually going to show you through how I've created today. So yeah, let's get started. So to begin with, what I do is I create a bit of a plan, and I've drawn out the front of the vanity as well as what it looks like from the top down, and just make sure that everything will fit. Because this has got a little ceramic basin, I just need to make sure that it's going to fit into place. And then I take all those measurements that I've got on there and I create a cutting plan. This looks a little bit of a mess because I've actually gone through and cut everything out. Just so that when I come to glue it together, I'm just really basically just putting the pieces together in some sort of order. So here I'm just laying them all out. I've got the two inside pieces, which is the vertical pieces, and then the outside of the unit as well. I've gone through and marked where all of the shelving or the drawer dividers are going to be, and that's what I'm just gluing into place here. So just gluing them in where I've got the lines on the outside part of the unit. So I'll just let that one dry, and then I'll continue on with the other side as I'm putting them into place. This is about 2mm thick cardboard, so the glue dries pretty quick. It's just sort of a PVA type glue, craft glue. So it doesn't actually take too long, and because it's a bit thicker cardboard, it actually sort of stays in place pretty well. So once that's done, I'm just going to glue the other side of these two pieces. So these are going to make the left side and the right side of the cabinet, and each in the gaps here that I've just created, that's where the drawers are going to go. We're going to create those a little bit later. So I'll just do the other side as well. Basically exactly the same, repeating the process. And even though I've cut all of these out to size, I haven't used any like laser printer or anything like that. I've all cut them by hand. So one way to make sure that they're all square is I actually do use a little square that I've got just to double check and just make sure that everything is as it should be. This one here was sort of leaning off to one side a little bit, so it gave me an opportunity to kind of make sure that everything was all square. And it'll be really important that once I get it into the room, otherwise it's going to lean sort of obscurely off the wall. Here I'm just gluing it to the bottom plate of the unit, and in the between is where the cupboard will go. So I've got some cupboard doors to go in there. Now the most important measurement on here, which I've marked out, is the gap in the middle. So that needs to be wide enough for the basin to go into. And then here I'm just gluing on the top. So the top and the bottom and the two sides are basically mirror each other. They're all the same size. It's got a little bit of an overhang on the right and left hand side, just to give it a little bit of character, I guess. And then I'm just going to fit in the back. So that's been just cut to size, and this will actually help square everything up and just make it a little bit more solid, which is great. So yeah, just gluing it all up together. Make sure I glue around the edges so that we get as many contact points for the back, and then once it's dry, it's going to be pretty solid. in place there, and that just fits inside the both the top and the two sides. So the back, the middle piece in the where the cupboard is doesn't go all the way to the back of the unit. It all sits butted into the back panel. Now I'm just going to make up the top part. So we've got another drawer that sits on top of where the vanity is going to sit, or sorry, where the basin is going to sit. So just kind of got a little bit of two drawers on either side. So I'm just making up those individually and gluing those together. So that's just the back part. So gluing those in between the two side parts. And then when I go to put these up on top of the unit, again, it's just making sure that we've got that 40mm gap, or there's a 40mm gap in between these two drawers, which will mirror what we've been doing below. And that's just to make sure that we've got enough space for the basin to fit in. The basin is ceramic, so there is no movement with that. And I also just want to make sure that by the time that this is all glued and set, that I don't get to the end of it and realize that it's a millimeter too small or something silly like that. So here I'm just dry fitting it just to make sure, just double checking along the way while the glue is still wet, so I can adjust it if I need to. And then just putting on the top pieces as well. So they've got a little overhang on each side, but the back is flush and on that inside edge is flush, so that the the basin has got somewhere to fit into. Yeah, and just lining it all up, just making sure we've got some nice lines coming through, and just making sure that it lines up with the pieces below, both on the inside where the cupboard is and on the outside of the vanity unit. So yeah, just making sure that that's all nicely square, all glued into place. Any final adjustments while the glue is still wet? This glue is quite good because it does give a little bit of a little bit of play before it all kind of sets up. And then I'm just going to fit the shelf in, and basically that's kind of that'll finish off the base of the unit, which is great. And then after that we can move on to making out the drawers. So making out the drawers is just going to be a little bit more tedious because there's 10 of them. So I'm just going to, so here we're just going to adjust the shelf just to make sure that it's nice and square, and I'm just sort of eyeing it up just to make sure that it looks as square as possible. So yeah, so moving on to the drawers, as you can see there's 10 of them, and what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to sort of make sure that they all fit into it, because it's quite a reasonably tight fit because I didn't want too much play on it, but I want enough that it will slide in, and then when we paint it later that it's got a little bit of movement around the layers of paint to make sure that it does slide in and out. So the first thing is just to sort of work out which drawer bottoms fit best in which location. So once I've kind of worked all that out, then I'm just going to get all the smaller pieces that I've cut out and line them up with each of the drawers, so I can have everything all kind of laid out before I start. You don't have to do this. This is just kind of how I like to work. It just means that I can clearly see how far through I am. So that's the back of the drawers. And then, oh sorry, no, that's the front of the drawers, so the drawer fronts, and then some smaller pieces for the back, and got a couple of drawers off camera there. So it should have the base of the drawer, the two sides, the back and the front, so 5 pieces altogether for each drawer. So starting from the base, so the base is the full size of the drawer, and then the sides, what I've done is I've made allowances for the thickness of the base, and then the size of the sides, so they're both the same size, and that gives us enough room for the drawer to slide in and out of the space that we've provided, that we've made. And so gluing on the two sides first and just making sure that that's nice and square, and then I'm just going to glue in the back piece. Now these are all cut to the measurements of my plan, and as we've sort of gone along and created them, we've just had to make a few adjustments, which is normal, absolutely normal, as we kind of put it together. So just making a few adjustments. It's not much, but it's just enough so that the drawer sides don't push out on an obscure angle, and then the drawer would not be able to fit. So just making sure, double checking, make sure everything's all nice and square. So that's the back of the drawer. And then I basically do the same for the front. So we're just going to glue on the front and also just adjust as needed to make sure that it actually all fits. So that's how we do the drawer. We've got 9 more to do, which I'm not going to run through each one, but just to give you a little bit of a break, we're just going to speed up the process a little bit and see how it all fits together. One of the things that I've realised, and I'm actually going to change the design up a little bit. This was the original design, was just to have the drawers fit nice and flush. Gosh, that's gone into the wrong hole. Oops, never mind. We'll just wedge that out of there. Oh, there we go. That goes there. Is that they were to sit really flush like this, and it's got lots of gaps around the outside of them, which is fine. It doesn't need to be perfect, but I actually don't like the look. So I'm just going to use this as a base, and then I'm going to build out on top of it. But in order to do that, I am going to take some thinner mat board, and I'm actually going to create some drawer fronts. But what that means is that it's going to bulk out the actual drawer unit, and where everything would have sat flush before is no longer going to do that. So what I'm going to do is, I've got this is just a little bit of offcut, but I'm actually going to glue these onto here, which will add a little bit more of a lip to create is actually, what I realise is that I probably should have made this a bit bigger like the side anyway, but I didn't. So my mistake in doing that. So I'm going to glue these on here, and I've got another one to go on here. I'm just not too sure what to do with the top, but we might just leave that for now and concentrate on here. And then I'm going to use this to create some drawer fronts, and then I'll also cover the doors, although the doors will actually be exactly the same size, so they're not going to be any different than the size that they are now, because if this is going to come out, that's going to come out, plus I need to make sure that I can hinge it. So in actual fact, I wasn't too sure how I was going to hinge it, but if I put this on top of there, it gives me a sandwich to possibly look at doing a hinge. Yep, that's the way I'm going to do it. Okay, so just gluing this piece on the bottom. It's probably about, I want to say about 3 or 4 millimeters wide. About 3 millimeters, I would think. But it's just enough to give it a little bit more definition instead of being completely flat across the front. So by doing the bottom piece, well, actually doing all of them will actually help give a little bit more definition into the project. On the bottom, I'm just going to make some feet, and by doing that, I've just cut these 2 lengths, and then I'm just going to use some sandpaper to round the edges to kind of give it almost a 1920s kind of look to it. And I'll just layer those up so you kind of got a rounded edge on the top part, and then just sandwich those two together. And in actual fact, doing this feet like this is actually going to help strengthen that additional little piece that I've added on, just to make sure that it doesn't break away or fall apart. So I'm just putting the feet on and just lining it up with that outside edge so we get a bit of a lip happening with that bottom piece, and as well as the piece that I've just put on as well. And I've just made the second foot off camera. So now you can start to see it's really starting to come together and look more like a cabinet. And that's quite a simple little leg to put on it rather than 4 different feet having to line them all up. And I've just done it in one long piece. So from the side it'll look pretty cool. So just doing this next piece onto the cabinet. As I've mentioned before, because the cardboard is just a bit thicker, it actually is gluing together quite well and quite strong. Here I'm just doing the top piece, so I've actually thinned down rather than it all being the same depth. I've just made the top piece just a little bit narrower. I wasn't too sure quite how that was going to look, but as I was sort of playing around with different thicknesses of the cardboard, I found that the thinner width was going to work a lot better rather than it all being the same. And then it also meant that it wasn't going to stick out too far from the vanity. Gosh, I keep saying vanity. From the basin, which is going to sit on the vanity. So there we go. So just trying to give it a little bit of texture without having to play around with it too much. So for the drawer fronts, what I've done here is I've just cut it to size of the lower 4 drawers, and then I'm just going to mark it out where those dividers are. And so what this will do is it'll allow me to get a bit of more of a seamless look. And what I'm doing is I'm just cutting each drawer front, cutting off a little bit in between just to allow a little bit more movement. But then by having them all lined up like that, it just means that I'm able to, just basically match them all up. Here we're going to add in some more definition to the drawers. So what I'm wanting to do is just put a little bit of a shaker style on the front, and I'm just cutting about 2mm strips out of just cardboard. So that is actually it is a tissue box, so sort of cereal box thickness of cardboard, and just gluing those on around the outside edges of the drawers. So I'm just starting with the top and the bottom pieces first, and then I'll fill in the side pieces as well, just so that we get a nice little features happening on the drawers. So you can sort of start to see it all kind of coming together, and then just going down each of the sides. So it almost gives it that shaker style look on the cabinet. So the pieces are really quite small, and so actually having a good pair of tweezers is an absolute godsend. I don't have the smallest fingers in the world. And so, yeah, definitely having a good set of tweezers is a great tool to have. So yeah, so there's that's all four of them. I've made the other four off camera, and now just gluing them into place, you can kind of see how they're going to overlay the drawers that are already there, because they're going to come further out than the drawers that are already there. Plus, they will cover up the dividers between the where the drawers sort of sit, and so it gives it a bit more of a finished look, I reckon. And yeah, so that's kind of how it's going to look. So to glue them into place, what I'm just going to do is put a little bit of glue on the drawers in place, and try not to spread it around too much so that they actually end up by gluing into place. And then sitting the drawer fronts on top and just pressing them down just slightly, and that actually glues them into place quite easily, which is great. And then that also allows me to make sure that they line up rather than trying to glue them individually outside of the cabinet, because I run the risk of them being off center just slightly or just enough to be able to see. And because this is so tiny, anything that's sort of not in line or out of, that just doesn't kind of line up, you'll definitely notice it. Moving on to the top drawers now, we're just going to put some trim around these faces of these drawers as well. So using the same process as what we've done for the other drawer fronts. And with these, we're just making sure that cardboard trim or detail actually goes right to the edge of the drawers for those top and bottom pieces. And that just helps with the definition of the sort of shaker style that we're going for on the cabinet. So yeah, just pasting those out, top and bottom, cutting them to size. I actually find that this is the easiest way to do it, rather than trying to cut the individual pieces down, and then if you don't quite cut them right, they could be too short. It's just as easy to glue them on and then sort of cut them to size once they're sort of in place. So yeah, just using my lovely tweezers, which have been a godsend in this little tiny project, and just cutting down those side pieces, butting them into place, and then also gluing them in there as well. So it's a bit of a repetitive process, so we're just going to use the magic of the camera and create the second piece as well. So here we're just using exactly the same process as what we've done with the lower drawers, and placing the drawer into the unit and then gluing the drawer fronts on top. I'm just placing these next drawers into the unit as well, just to make sure that everything lines up and that nothing is slightly off skew. And here we're just doing the doors, exactly the same process. So doing the top and the bottom rather than the long side, so that if there's any definition that comes out with the painting, and I'm going to do some sort of white dry brushing over the top to give it some definition, it just means that where the two pieces of cardboard butt into each other, so on the drawers it's the top and bottom pieces, and then the side pieces are the shorter ones. Then it's the same for the doors as well. So you get where they kind of butt in together. So here I'm just fitting it all into place to make sure that it all fits together. And here I'm just cutting out some more cardboard strips, because we're going to do exactly the same effect on both sides of the cabinet. So following exactly the same process as what we've done with the drawers and the doors, using the top and the bottom on each of these pieces. So this top piece of the cabinet will have the same trim around each part of it, exactly the same as what we've done with the other parts of the cabinet. So what I'm doing here is just marking them all out and cutting them to size. It just makes the gluing process or putting them all together just that much quicker. A lot of these steps in here are very repeatable, which actually for me was quite relaxing for the most part. So I didn't find it too annoying or stressful, which I could imagine for some it might be. So yeah, just cutting them all out to size, and then it just makes that gluing process a little bit quicker. Okay, so moving on to creating some hinges. Big deep breath here because these are so tiny. The cabinet is not very big, these are even smaller. And so what I've got some here is about 1mm wire. It's about the size of a gauge wire that you'd have on a paper clip, possibly just a slightly bit smaller, but it's wire that I had on hand. And so what I'm trying to do here is just straighten them up as best as I can. And the pieces of wire that I've cut are way too long. They are absolutely way too long. But I'm cutting them long so that I make sure that I've got something to hold on to as things start to get smaller and smaller. To make up the rest of the hinges, I am using like this sketch paper. It's just a bit thicker than copy paper, but not as thick as cardstock, and just cutting a couple of strips. So yeah, just cutting them down in half and then half again. So this will make up the two parts of a hinge. So one part of the hinge is normally fixed, and the other one is a little bit more free, which allows it to move around the piece of wire. So to create the fixed part, what I'm doing here is I'm actually gluing, using super glue, one of these pieces of paper, and I'm just going to glue it to the end of the wire. Now you can either glue it right to the end or you can glue it in the middle. It doesn't really matter. The wire just gives you a little bit more room to be able to roll it around. So this next part gets really fiddly because what we're going to do is roll the paper around the wire as tight as possible. And then I'm just going to use a little bit of the glue that I've been using for the rest of the project just to hold it into place. So by the time we've got the super glue and the craft glue, and then you can kind of see here, I'm just pinching the two together and then just rolling it around the wire as tight as I possibly can. And that just, and then with that glue, just all holds it together. And we've just got some extra piece of paper there which we can glue to the cabinet. And that's what I was talking about before, where it's just sort of sandwich it in between the two pieces of cardboard that we've got. So I'm just going to pop them aside, let them dry, and now I'm going to move on to the handles. So these what I've printed out on my Cricut machine, from my Cricut machine, using the same gauge paper, but it is really, really thin. So what I'm going to do is going to double them up. This is quite a fiddly process. So basically layering one handle on top of the other. At the moment they're completely flat. So as I'm gluing them together, I'm going to start shaping them into place. So the little crescent shape at the end of each of these is what's going to glue onto the face of the drawer fronts. And as you can see, I'm just starting to bend them into the shape of a handle. It's a little bit tiny, a little bit tedious. As you can see, we've got quite a few to get through. So cue the montage. Okay, so moving on to the second part of the hinge. This part here needs to roll freely around the wire. So as I'm going to glue this on, I'm just going to leave about 5mm from the top of the piece of paper and just run a bit of glue down the rest of it, and then using the same process as before, just between my fingers, is rolling the paper round on top of itself. One thing I don't want it to do is to catch on the wire, because we want it to make sure that it rolls around freely. Moving on to painting the cabinet, we're just going to put 2 coats of black paint over everything, and then we'll come back and put in some more details. Okay, so moving on to the hinges and the cabinet handles. So for both of these, we're actually going to put a bronze metallic finish over the top, but that works best if there's a base coat or a base colour. For these, I'm just going to use black because I think it will match with the rest of the cabinet. Just while that's drying, we're going to move on to some dry brushing. I'm just going to use some white paint, and then I'm going to brush off as much as I can. And then just using this technique on all of the edges of the cabinet, as well as around the sort of trim around the sides of the cabinet, as well as the doors and the drawer fronts as well. And just adds a little bit more definition to the project. So now all the handles have been painted up, it's time to put them onto the drawer fronts. So I'm just placing a little bit of glue on those crescent shapes at the end of each of the handles and trying to line them up as best as possible in the center of the drawer. Okay, so we are on the home stretch. Another deep breath. This is what I'm going to do here is actually fit the hinges to the cabinet, and it is getting smaller and smaller as I start clipping away the wire. So starting to clip that away down to the right size. And then what I'm going to do is just separate out the hinges. So what we're going to do is glue the fixed part of the hinge, so that has the wire in with the paper wrapped around it, and then I'm just going to bend it sort of slightly into shape just so that it kind of fits around and where that part of the hinge sits on top of the cabinet. And it's a really bit hard to see because it's so tiny and I have got the camera so far away. I've done one cabinet door already, and so here I'm just going to mark up on the second door where the hinges are. So the first one I just sort of did it by sight, just sort of eyeballed it, and so the second one we just want to make sure that it's as lined up as possible. So here I'm just putting the glue onto the back of it, and so that means we can glue, leaving that piece of paper long. I haven't trimmed that down at all. So just leaving that nice and long, it means I can wrap it around the back of part of that door and it's got something decent to grab hold of. So rather than cutting that down into something quite small, the risk is that it will just tear away. Apologies that that's completely off camera, but hopefully you can kind of understand what it is that I'm trying to say. So yeah, just again with the second one, gluing it on the, so that the hinge actually is on the front part of the cabinet door, and then that's around that first front face of the cabinet door, and then I'm just going to glue that back piece on, so that'll just bulk it out, just like what we've done with the drawer fronts. So just having that extra layer on top of the drawer fronts, and just using that and to kind of glue it all together and sandwich it in between the door. So yeah, just putting it all together now with the doors in place and just putting the drawers in. I'm not pushing them all the way into the project because they are still a little bit sticky with the paint, and I don't want to get them in and never get them out again. So I am absolutely stoked with how this has turned out. Just with even with the pivot in the middle of the project, I think it's actually been worthwhile spending the time doing that, putting the drawer fronts on, doing the trim around all of the projects, just made everything just pop and stand out. So yeah, hopefully that you've enjoyed, and catch you on the next one.